On behalf of the Armenagan-Hovsepian New York, New Jersey chapter of the Armenian Democratic Liberal Party, welcome to our live webinar today. I am your host, Norair Meguerditchian. Today's webinar will comprise an interview with diplomat and historian, Professor Jirair Libaridian. Welcome, Dr. Libaridian, and thank you for being with us and accepting our invitation and making this event possible. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this interview do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Armenian Democratic Liberal Party. Our purpose, in line with our liberal principles, is to help air a variety of perspectives such that our audience members might become more fully informed and make up their own minds. Kindly also note that you might key in your questions at any time during the interview on the Q&A section below on your screens. Our default will be ask questions anonymously. However, if you wish to be mentioned along with your question, please write your name before the question or after the question. The interview will be conducted by our very own Professor Shahé Sanens, an advisor on the executive committee of our New York, New Jersey chapter. Dr. Sanens, an information scientist and educator, is adjunct professor at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. In the 1990s and 2000s, he held positions of increasing responsibility in several of the world's leading pharmaceutical and telecommunications corporations, rising to senior knowledge analyst. He holds a PhD in information science from Rutgers and a master's degree from Harvard. Please, Shahé, the screen is yours, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Norair. With post-war political thinking as our primary focus, today we will explore the political and related options available to Armenia at this critical juncture in our history, and then look ahead a bit. For this purpose, we are very pleased and privileged to have with us today accomplished historian and seasoned diplomat, Professor Gerard Jirair Libaridian. Dr. Libaridian is Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and he has published and lectured widely. In the 1990s, he served as Senior Advisor to the President of the Republic of Armenia, Levon Ter-Bedrosyan, as well as Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Ambassador and First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of the National Security Council. Welcome, Dr. Libaridian.
Thank you, Shahé. My pleasure.
We have a great deal to cover, so let us dive right in. The title of our webinar is Post-War Political Thinking. In your work, you have often emphasized the importance of political thinking. How is political thinking different from plain old vanilla thinking? What distinguishes it?
I will focus, Shahé, on the word thinking, political thinking as a system. That is, there are many issues, minor, major, and individuals, political parties, governments have positions on these issues. That is, what is the problem? How do you resolve it? But behind all these positions, policies, there is what is called the political thinking. How do we think about political issues? How close are we to realities? What role do we give to information? What role do we give to analysis? What role do we give to the development of various scenarios? So the political thinking that I refer to is basically, do we have a rational approach to politics that is as close to science as possible? Of course, neither history nor politics are science, although we call them sciences. But do we say, this is the problem, this is the solution, and then we try that solution, it doesn't work. and we say, okay, there must be something wrong with our thinking. We go back. Is it in the execution that we failed? Is it in the system that we failed? Is it in our analysis? Or did we not have enough information? So this is a rational process. And this, I might add, is essential for democracy. Democracy is worthless if people do not know. If you do not give them the facts, if you do not tell them how you think, how did you get to a conclusion, then people don't know how to treat you, how to take your position. So political thinking is the system which is operating and through which you come to conclusions on issues, conflicts, problems.
Okay. US recognition now at the highest level of the Armenian genocide has buoyed up the Armenian community throughout the world. On the one hand, we are very grateful to President Biden for finally proclaiming the truth. We also know that Biden kicked out Turkey from NATO's F-35 fighter jet program, that Secretary Blinken referred to Turkey as a so-called ally, and sanctions were imposed on Turkey. And a few days ago, both Azerbaijan and Turkey were placed on the United Nations Commission on International Religious Freedom special watch list for their egregious violations. On the other hand, we also know that Biden waived congressional sanctions against Azerbaijan, that there has been no explicit condemnation of Turkey and Azerbaijan for their aggression. There has been no clear indication that the US will provide substantive aid to Artsakh or Armenia. Biden and Erdogan will be meeting on the sidelines of the NATO summit next month. Given all this and more, how might our political and diplomatic calculus change as a consequence of Biden's use of the G word? And how would you characterize Biden's overall position vis-a-vis Armenia and the Caucasus?
A very important and loaded question, of course. Let me see if I can answer it in a way that is not detailed but comprehensive. First of all, the genocide recognition of the genocide is important, obviously, important to our people. I wish it had come earlier so that survivors could have seen it. It came late. Now, and I do think that President Biden has a strain of idealism in him. That is, it's not just calculation that matters in terms of the recognition or many other issues. Although still the US is the most powerful country in the world, and it has to calculate. Now, I don't think people realize that the recognition of the genocide against the Armenian people was something that the US needed, not for the Armenians, but for itself. Under President Trump, we lost quite of moral authority and credibility in the world. This was one way to say, yes, sometimes we can go against interests and we can recognize the truth for the sake of the truth and for the sake of the almost spiritual comfort of Armenians. But it was important for the US as well. So when we do this, we must think, when we enjoy the recognition, we must think of what is also happening in a wider circle. Let me also say that for many decades, I have been suspicious about recognition of the genocide. I have been suspicious because often that has come just before a country does something bad for us. This has been true in the past. I think to some extent, today's recognition of the genocide is, number one, a consolation prize. That is, we didn't do anything to help you during the war, but we will give you something symbolic. But also to allow the administration to waive Section 907, to waive the dealings, military dealings with Azerbaijan. Now, finally, we have to distinguish between acts that have symbolic value, such as recognition of the genocide, which practically means nothing, and acts that mean something, military assistance, technological assistance, or whatever you may need at that point, diplomatic assistance. You referred to, well, the third point is that Turkey is an important ally of the US. Whatever the small steps that are taking place between Turkey, US, Turkey, France, the larger picture is that Turkey is important to these countries and to NATO. And therefore, small steps against sanctions here, sanctions there, they do not amount to much when it comes to the larger picture, which is the following. Turkey is playing its old game of being between the two big sides and is taking steps that may mean that they're no longer depend on NATO or the US, but on the other hand, are part of NATO and officially allies, formally allies of the US, and the US and Europe will not want to see Turkey go all the way to the side of Russia or China. Consequently, they will give us symbolic aid and minor assistance, but they will not give us whatever is the larger need that we have. Finally, even before the war, we have to realize that our expectation that the US or France or Europe or anyone would come to our aid militarily or diplomatically was a misplaced hope. There could not be such a thing because the world had told us from Russia to Iran to Turkey to the US and Europe, Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan in their view. That's not my message, but it is their message. For 30 years, they've told us. And that the 7 districts which came under Armenian control during the war, the first war, around Karabakh, belong to Azerbaijan, and these must be returned. Every proposal that came from the OSCE said that. Every statement from Russia, Iran said that. So our expectation should not have been that in case of war, they will come to help us. In fact, I had written that the treaty we have with Russia talks about possible assistance to Armenia if Armenia is attacked. It does not talk about assistance to Armenia if Karabakh is attacked. And so it had been made clear in various resolutions, in various forums, that the world is not with us on that issue, and that the world would tolerate an Azerbaijani attack. And this was clear in 1993. This was clear in later encounters. This was clear in 2016. So we know that they would not help us. They, in the substance of the Karabakh conflict, whether having nothing to do with genocide and our beautiful black eyes and the love affair they have with Grigor Naregatsi and Moses Khorenadze, it doesn't matter. On the basics of the Karabakh conflict, every country in the world was with Azerbaijan. Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan. The status should be negotiated within that larger principle. The 7 districts should be returned. This was.
Bernard Kouchner, former foreign minister of France, has said that Erdogan is in a difficult political and economic situation now, and that Armenia can perhaps take advantage of this. Would you agree?
Well, you know, Armenia can take advantage of such situations if Armenia has diplomatic imagination. If Armenia can imagine situations, not fantasize, but imagine. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Can I turn my weakness into a strength? Is this the right time to talk to Turkey or Azerbaijan? But I don't think we have it at this point. We might have, if we had a different kind of approach to our issues. Right now, we feel defeated. We feel extremely down. And when I say we, that is the İşğanutun, that is the government in Armenia. I don't think they're capable of benefiting. But the more important principle here is the following, Shahé. In our history, we have made these calculations. We have interpreted the troubles of our neighbors as reasons why to underestimate them. Turkey is in trouble. Turkey can be in trouble for 20 years. But Turkey is still the most powerful neighbor we have. That will not change. That is what I have written about our 19th century revolutionary movement and political thinking. The Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe. And we interpreted that to mean that it was extremely weak. Well, the Ottoman Empire was weak compared to the French, the British, the Germans, the Russians. It was not weak, even at its weakest, against poor, unprotected Armenians, Kurds, and whatever. So I remember a discussion on a basketball player who was exceptional, American basketball player, and he got older and he couldn't play as well as the others, as well as he could before. And they criticized the manager for keeping him when he couldn't play as well. And the guy said, look, even when he's not as good as before, he's better than anyone else on the field. Okay? So we have to understand the relation of the power relations. We are not part of the West militarily, diplomatically. If the West inflicts damage on Turkey, we don't necessarily benefit.
Some have suggested that Russo-Turkish rapprochement would be beneficial to Armenia, reasoning that if the two were to fight, Armenia would become their battlefield and would get trampled. Would you agree?
Well, Armenia could be trampled when they fight. Armenia has been trampled when they didn't fight and were making love to each other. Armenia can be trampled in either case.
In either case. You have said that what is going on is a slow motion rivalry, in fact, between Russia and Turkey for influence in Azerbaijan.
Right.
What is the Turkish endgame and what is the Russian endgame? You have suggested that Russia allowed Turkey in order to kick out the West.
Right.
But what is the next big step for Russia? And finally, what is the Armenian endgame?
Well, it is difficult to be sure about what the Russian endgame is. And Turkey, that is, Turkey wants to expand its influence on Azerbaijan and then through Azerbaijan on Central Asian countries. This was done when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it did not work. The Central Asians, the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Turkmens told Turkey that they did not become independent in order to become dependent on Turkey. Independence from Russia, but they also wanted to be independent from Turkey. So there's always a limit to how much Turkey could do eventually. And I'm not sure that Erdogan's policy will be the permanent part of Turkey's policy when he's no longer there. That is, not with regard to Azerbaijan, but with regard to the perspective of going all the way to Central Asia in the way he is imagining himself. That is even more than the Ottoman Empire. So I think the Russians, the main purpose was to make sure that the West does not conquer politically and diplomatically the South Caucasus. It punished Georgia severely for trying to, and now it wants to make sure that there is a permanent exit for the West from this region. That is its goal. Now, some people think it is expansionism, others think this is defensive on the part of Russia because the way the US, NATO, and others behaved after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's important to keep in mind, even if we're not sure of what the reason is, as I once told my colleague Vafa Gulizadeh when he was talking about kicking out Russia from Azerbaijan and the region, and I told him, you don't underestimate Russia. And Russia does have legitimate interests because of the way the NATO was behaving. I think it is important to understand that we are not as strong as we think. Russia is not as weak as we think. Neither is the US as strong as we think. You have nuclear power, but you cannot use it in or around Karabakh, in or around the Palestinians. So I think it's very important to be measured in these cases and to think of various possibilities. The key is here. Small states, particularly in the situation that Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan are, between three major powers, and then with interests from the US and Europe, small states do not have the right or the privilege or the luxury of thinking with one logic. This is what I think Russia wants. This is what I think Turkey wants. And therefore, this is what I will do. There can't be anything like that. We have to say, what if I misunderstood Turkey or Russia? What if I can interpret what Russia is doing slightly differently? Then what I mean is that our diplomacy, our thinking must have an answer for various scenarios, not just one scenario.
Let's take one of those scenarios. If we had our druthers, would we want Russian peacekeepers to stay beyond 5 years in, Artsakh? And if yes, what can be done to keep them there? For example, what about the idea of Russian citizenship for Artsakh residents?
Well, whether we want, first part is, do we want Russia
beyond 5 years?
If the Russians aren't there, the Karabakh leadership has said no Armenian will be left in Karabakh. This is their position. Okay? If the Russian, that is, they cannot imagine a status or an accommodation under Azerbaijani sovereignty. This is what they're saying. Whether this is the right thing to do or not, considering the fact that, as you said, in 5 years, the Russians may be asked to leave. In 10 years, they may have to leave because the November 9 declaration is maximum 10 years. Of course, it could be renewed, but I do not believe Azerbaijan will want that. Azerbaijan is already talking about, why do we need them? We'll provide security for Armenians, right? So do we want them there? It doesn't look like we have any choice. What can we do to keep them there? Well, not much. That is, if Russia can do it, they will stay whether we like it or not.
Well, what about the citizenship question?
Well, the citizenship is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The citizenship is a way for Russia to say, we have citizens here and we're protecting them,
right,
as they did elsewhere. But will that be enough for Russia to stay there forever? I do not know. I'm not sure Russia knows. There are so many unknowns at this point. You know, at this point, we have some stability because it's Aliyev on one side, Erdogan on the other, and Putin. We have three authoritarian governments, and they are likely to provide some stability and continuity in policy so you can calculate. But what happens if Erdogan is not there anymore? What happens if Aliyev is not there anymore, or Putin? So we have to, the citizenship question, I do not believe, is an answer to what now the problem of Karabakh has become. The problem of Karabakh has changed since the war. So we have a different situation, and we have to understand what that situation is.
What is that situation then?
The situation is that, as I said, the world had recognized Azerbaijan's territorial integrity as Azerbaijan understood it, which means Karabakh within it. De jure, Karabakh, as far as the world is concerned, Karabakh has always been part of Azerbaijan. Regardless of what legal arguments we bring, history we write, the world, for its own reasons, said Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan. Now see what you can do with it. Okay, that was the case. Now, de facto, that is the case. That is, Azerbaijan took the 7 districts, a few of them by war, the other under the threat of more war, and took part of Karabakh, and said, okay, what remains can, for the time being, go and stay like that.
Okay, so that takes us to the November 9 agreement.
Right.
It provides some wiggle room, you have said. How ought we to approach these negotiations then, given that wiggle room?
Well, to begin with, any policy toward Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, Iran, the world, must begin with the understanding of where we stand now. That is, in order to build policy, you have to have a basis for the policy. I'm afraid that in many cases, we do not accept the realities as the basis. Where are we starting? We are too far behind. We're not at where we were before. And we are too far behind in the race. So we must begin by saying, we lost the war, number one. Why did we lose the war? We miscalculated. We went after fantasies. We overestimated our capabilities, underestimated the enemy, dismissed Turkey's support, overestimated what support the world would give us in the case of Pashinyan because we are democratic. For 30 years, Azerbaijan has not been democratic, but Azerbaijan has received all the support it needs. It doesn't matter whether we are democratic or not, but we calculated that, yes, we are democratic, so the democratic West would be with us. What that meant, I don't understand. Were they going to send soldiers? Were they going to tell Azerbaijan, don't do it? But they've told Azerbaijan, this is yours. What if after 30 years, Azerbaijan goes and takes it, says, look, negotiations are going nowhere. You told us this is our land, but you didn't do anything. You didn't put Armenia under sanctions. You didn't do anything for us to get that land, so we go to war. This is the logic.
Yes.
And the world has nothing to say about this. So we begin with the realities. The second point is, do we have any military power now? Do we have a plan that is different from what we had before in terms of how to defend that country? Do we have a military strategy, logic, as to what we can do to defend and what we need to defend, and how can we fill the gap to defend? And that is right now happening with Sunik, and I'm not sure we're interpreting what's happening the right way in Armenia or elsewhere, but whatever is happening is showing us the weaknesses we are under. That is, we cannot be developing policies on the basis of fantasies again. Now, after that, we have to realize that we will not get those territories back. See, Azerbaijan had 10 wars to lose. They could have lost 10 wars. They could have lost this one. They would come back. They have enough resources and support. They have countries that support them unconditionally. We'd have no such country. Russia does not support us unconditionally, right? In the Karabakh War. In fact, Russia did not support us, except continued to give Armenia weapons, which were used over there. So a good policy will be to begin by assessing things the way they are, and then say, what is left of Karabakh to resolve? Now, some people think that we could go and take everything back. I think these people are delusional. Delusional. And it's not because I wouldn't like to do that. Okay, I would like Western Armenia, but it's delusional at this point. The other possibility is that Russians remain there somehow, and we build a smaller Artsakh to our liking and still think that we have Artsakh.
Any territorial swap possibilities?
Between whom?
Armenia and Azerbaijan, with the Lachin and Meguerditchian, those things that have been discussed in the past.
Well, I hope that Meguerditchian is never under discussion, although under Kocharyan it became a subject of negotiations, which was extremely unfortunate. Because once that came on the table, it is very difficult to take off. During our time, we made it impossible for Azerbaijan, Turkey, or anyone to raise that question. It was absolutely non-negotiable, not even for Lachin. It was non-negotiable.
So what negotiations cards do we have then?
I think what is left is, well, if what I'm saying is right, then there's no chance for an independent Artsakh. There may be a chance for a Russian-controlled Artsakh, but that doesn't really depend too much on us. It depends on Russia and Azerbaijan, and a little bit on Turkey. We have lost our ability to defend Artsakh, and the Artsakh leadership knows that, and they no longer listen to Yerevan. They don't follow a Yerevan policy, whatever that may be. They are saying we are with Russia, whatever Russia wants to do with us, to be part of Russia, to be controlled by Russia, to be governed by Russia. As long as it's not Azerbaijan, it doesn't have to be Armenia. This is what they're saying. So, but that does not depend on us. Not 20%, maybe 10%. Now, what remains is, if there's such a possibility, is that better than other possibilities? Here's my understanding. Status has two dimensions, okay? Not one. When people negotiate status or discuss status, they think it's a question of whether is Artsakh part of Azerbaijan, part of Armenia, independent, or under the UN or under Russia, right? Well, there are two issues, two dimensions to the question of the status. One is, how does Artsakh, populated by Armenians, govern itself? How is it governed? Is it governed by its own authority, legislative, executive, judicial, by its own, as it did to some extent under the Soviets, or under different formulas as an autonomous region of Azerbaijan, as Heydar Aliyev used to think, saying, I'm ready to give the highest level of autonomy. Ilham Aliyev, before the war, used to say, I'm willing to discuss autonomy. Now he says, I went to war for it, forget autonomy. So is there some kind of territorially defined Armenian Artsakh regardless as to who is the sovereign country. Okay?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing? The second dimension is under whose sovereignty you have that kind of autonomy. Azerbaijan, Armenia, Russia, UN, or whatever. Okay? I think distinguishing between these two dimensions is important.
Yes.
Now, it seems to me that the second question has been resolved. That is, it is under Azerbaijan. The Russians say so. The Russians do not do anything that is fundamentally against Azerbaijan's policies. The Lachin corridor is now controlled. Who goes in, what goes in, it is controlled by the Russians and Azerbaijan. If you want to go as an American, as a Frenchman, to Karabakh today, you will have to go and register and get a visa from the Artsakh office in Yerevan. But they have to give a list to the Russian gatekeepers, and that list is checked by Azerbaijan as well. Okay? So that is already de facto, we have difficulty communicating with Karabakh. That means that what remains is already Azerbaijan. The question is, Ilham Aliyev says no more autonomy. No, there is no longer territorially defined Armenian Artsakh. Now, whether he does anything about it today or not is not the question. In the long run, he says this is it. Here's my question. Is there any way to negotiate with Aliyev to provide for a territorially defined Armenian self-governing entity, which would be an Armenian Artsakh, whatever the name, whatever the sovereign? Or will we lose that as well? Right now, Azerbaijan is tolerating the self-governance because they think it's Russians. Armenians don't matter. It's the Russians who decide. But they think that Ilham says what will happen is that Armenians can live in Karabakh, but it's no longer Artsakh. You don't govern yourself as such. If you have a village or a town that has majority Armenian, says Aliyev, you can elect an Armenian chief, village chief. You can elect an Armenian mayor. But these are Azerbaijani officials. They're part of the Azerbaijani administration. You can have your schools, your churches, your clubs, and maybe publish books or newspapers, but that's about it. More or less like what we have for Armenians in Turkey. That is, certain rights as an ethno-religious minority, but not as a territorially defined ethnic nationality self-governance. So this is where we are. Now, the Russians are somewhere there. As we said, whether the Russians stay or go will not depend so much on us, but on Azerbaijan and Russia. Does Russia want to stay? It is likely that it wants to stay, while recognizing that what they have is the agreement of Azerbaijan to be there, while declaring that Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan. President Putin said that many times. Lavrov said that many times. And when the Russian leaders today, Lavrov, Putin, are talking about status, they're saying, yeah, we should or we shouldn't discuss it. They're not talking about whether Karabakh is independent or could be independent or not. They're talking on whether there will be a territorially defined Artsakh, Armenian Artsakh or not.
Okay. India, let's talk a little bit about India, is pushing to make the Chabahar seaport the most important port in the region, and to open up trade routes both to Afghanistan and possibly through Armenia to Europe. China wishes to invest over $400 billion over 25 years and get Iranian oil in exchange. There is much talk these days about vaccine diplomacy. Serbia and China, for example, Chinese influence in Serbia. More apropos, recently, on May 1st, 100 doses of the Chinese CoronaVac vaccine arrived in Armenia, which dwarfs the amount, the 24,000 amount of AstraZeneca and 43,000 Russian Sputnik V. Then, of course, there's the Belt and Road Initiative. How would you appraise the significance of these larger developments for Armenia? You have met with the Chinese, you have said. Have your meetings revealed anything that might be useful now? Have you met with the Indians at all?
The Chinese, yes. The Indians, not so much. In fact, I was supposed to go to India with the president at that time, but ended up with more intense negotiations. So I have not been in contact with the Indians. Iranians, Turks, Azerbaijanis, Chinese, Egyptians, Americans, etc. Yes. Now, let me begin with another pessimistic assessment. When we talk about these various routes, Armenia as a transport hub, we have to understand that it is not Armenia that matters. It is that region that matters. The best example of this is the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline. We could have gotten it if we had made more compromises on Karabakh. We said no. So they went around us. We could have opened a rail line to Turkey. We didn't resolve the conflict. They opened the rail line through Georgia. So all of these can go through Armenia, could have gone through Armenia, or could have gone around Armenia. And that's what has happened so far. So the big question is always this: what, under the best of circumstances, does Armenia represent? Well, roots, economic significance, yes. We shouldn't exaggerate our strategic significance, because what we say about Armenia, Georgians say about Georgia, Azerbaijanis say about Azerbaijan. There's enough technology to bypass Armenia now in any of those situations. And what is the Russian, what are the Russians doing in Meghri? Well, they are punishing again, among other things, they're punishing Georgia because Russia-Armenia was through Georgia. Now they've created Russia-Azerbaijan, Armenia. So countries have these capitals, they have these interests, and they can bypass Armenia. Now, we have one opportunity now to make the Meghri corridor an international passage area, but we're resisting that, right? We're finding problems with it. Well, there are problems, but these problems, I think, could be resolved, should be resolved, because China is not going, or India is not going to do much with us if we have problems with international corridors and passageways. The bottom line, though, is right now, what is our negotiating position? It is weak. And we are dealing basically with Azerbaijan and Turkey. Will all of these projects be realized if we don't have normal relations with our neighbors, even if their impact is limited to economic impact and a little bit of strategic, if something goes through Armenia? It will not translate into military, right? So we should not overestimate our strategic significance.
Some have asserted that the diaspora ought to be an extension of the foreign policy of Armenia. Would you agree with this? And what principles, more generally, what principles should guide the activism of diasporan Armenians. You have said, for example, that diasporan thinking has been wrong, that diasporan Armenians have funded the impossible. First, what was that impossible? And then what should the diaspora be funding instead?
Well, to begin with, I need to take a moment and put a question mark every time we use the term diaspora.
Okay.
Because we do not have a diaspora other than there are Armenians, I don't know, 5 million, 8 million, some people say 10 million, who live outside. And they live in important countries. But that does not necessarily mean that there is a diaspora of 10 million that are waiting for some kind of policy to be followed or waiting to develop policy. 30 years, different governments in Armenia have wondered, what is this diaspora? We have political parties that behave each on their own. We have a church that behaves on its own, a split church, right? A Catholicos in Antilles, Lebanon, but at the same time, a number of huge constituencies for Echmiadzin. So, and then there's a huge number of Armenians who don't do anything, who don't give anything, who are not interested in anything. So if we are talking about the diaspora that may make a difference or has made a difference, we cannot imagine this unified total 10 million, 5 million. We have to say that within the diaspora, we have worked against each other. Within the diaspora and in Armenia, we have struggled against each other, projected our political parties there and went our different ways. So this is a very important thing. Secondly, we have had a diaspora, a segment of the diaspora that has gone against the Armenian governments at different times. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. So there's no guarantee that you could have a, you could rely on the diaspora. So what is the diaspora we are talking about? I'm afraid, I can tell you a story. Once when I was in the government with Bedrosian, he called me, he said, I have some guests, I want you to come and sit at the meetings. And there were a number of Spirka Haygaz Meguerditchian that were there. And each one was saying, this is what Armenia needs to do. This is what the diaspora thinks. Okay? Who speaks for the diaspora? Who speaks for the diaspora? Everyone speaks for the diaspora. And there are so many individuals who work with Armenia on so many in different ways, but they do not belong to any of those organizations. They do it independently of the organization. So we have to begin with the organized diaspora. We have the non-organized diaspora that helps. We have the diaspora that is non-organized and doesn't give a damn. So Bedrosian said, look, you guys go, agree among yourselves, elect a representative of the diaspora, and I will speak with them equally. I cannot deal with the diaspora as diaspora. I can deal individually with organizations, but if you want to be taken seriously as diaspora. Now, I have said that to the extent that a good part of the organized diaspora has supported extreme positions, has supported fantasies, has supported, the definition of policy that is simply put anti-Azerbaijan, anti-Turkey. If you are anti-Turkey, anti-Azerbaijan, that's good policy. Okay? To the extent that this has happened, the diaspora has done damage. That is, it has contributed to the impression created by forces within Armenia that have told any government, you give one district bad and you are a Tavajan. Okay? This mentality, for example, was key for Pashinyan not to come to an agreement before, not to come to an earlier agreement during the war when it was clear we were losing. He did not want to be called a Tavajan. And he did not want to talk to people saying, look, guys, we are losing. And I don't want one more Armenian guy to die. I will go and make the compromises necessary, which we would have done much better if he had done that than what we ended up with. Okay? So to the extent, as I'm saying, I'm not saying all the diasporans did that, but to the extent that they contributed to this mentality that giving anything back is Tavajanutun, is treason, then the diaspora has done a bad job.
Okay, let us focus for a moment on the information war. The Azeris and the Turks have well-funded and coordinated PR campaigns. Generally speaking, we don't have the PR firepower to counter their lies. Erdogan has recently decreed that movies and TV series would be made on the Artsakh war, and it will be funded, made collaboratively by Turkey and Azerbaijan. Cybersecurity expert Ruben Muradian said recently that he registered at least 20 cyber attacks right before September 27th. Then on September 27th, there were multiple attacks on news websites and data leaks from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Security Service, the President's Office, nuclear power station, and so on. Also, during the Artsakh war, the Azeris had access to the NKR telecom, the cell towers and the base telephone stations. The technology allowed them to analyze radio frequency loads and determine how many people were in that area for targeting. So during the Soviet era, Armenia excelled in intra-Soviet technology in that sector. Yet we lost the Artsakh war, some say, due to superior technology, which the Azeris possessed. Are we to conclude that during the past decades, Azeris have surpassed us technologically? Are we losing the information war?
Probably. You see, when we talk about Azerbaijan, we shouldn't think of them as the guys who lost the war. Okay? That was part of our understanding. Azerbaijan Siner Abushen. Azerbaijanis will not know how to use their money that comes from oil and gas. Azerbaijan, Azerbaijanis are Turks, and Turks are, despite the evidence to the contrary. So we have these mental games we play in order to minimize the dangers. Azerbaijan is an authoritarian state, is a corrupt state, but if you look at what kind of investment they're making, now I'm not talking about buildings and hotels. I'm talking about worldwide investments financially. So if the oil runs out, they will still have money. I'm talking about the investment in the next generation. They have thousands studying in the US and Europe. And they are very good in many ways. They may not be democratic. China is not democratic, but China has surpassed so many other countries that are. I'm not saying democracy doesn't matter. It does matter, but we cannot think of Azerbaijanis less because they're not democratic. So they are investing. What has the Armenian government done after the ceasefire of '94 to invest in a new future generation that must compensate not only for what there is, and you should be updated, but compensate for the demographic balance, which we don't have, and compensate for the money, which we don't have, and compensate for the support that Turkey, Israel, Pakistan, and so many other countries provide. For example, do we know what Italy is doing about Azerbaijan? Yeah, Italy is nothing, right? Well, Italy has huge investments there. Italian government is extremely pro-Azerbaijani. And not just the Italian, in the UK. The UK has always been pro-Azerbaijan. So that when they go out, they have the money, they have the planning, okay, to buy technology, to buy know-how that goes with the technology. They have it. How have we thought about the future since the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s? How have we thought about it to be able to say, we know what is happening and we are countering it with the following?
Yep. I have distinctly felt a bias in Lebanon, where I grew up, in favor of medical and engineering careers, while political science and economics were looked down upon. As far as heroes in the diplomatic arena, we have Israel Ori, who set Armenia's pro-Russian orientation in the early 18th century. You have mentioned in a lecture King Hetum I of Cilicia, who traveled to Karakorum, spent 1.5 years to negotiate with the Mongols. But these are far and in between. Would you agree that a diplomatic tradition is a weak suit for Armenians? Also, being mentored leads one to become a mentor later on. Would you agree that a mentoring tradition, especially in the diplomatic space, is also weak among Armenians?
Well, I think that diplomacy, as in other fields, cannot be judged in the abstract. They have to be assessed in relation to what? At different times, in different places, you have different problems. Are your diplomats or negotiators or representatives up to understanding the problem, the opposition, and negotiate accordingly? Are we up to that? So, you know, sometimes we have been and sometimes we have not been. I think the mentoring is absolutely right. That is, but when was it that we needed diplomacy in the last 100 years? Okay? We should not confuse, I'm sorry to say, we should not confuse political leadership of a community with the ability to negotiate. To negotiate as a Ramgavar with a Tashnakchagan is not the same as to negotiate as an Armenian state representative with a Turkish state representative. These are very, very different mindsets, atmospheres, different power relations, different factors that make up your strengths and your weaknesses. And we have not had that much. But the question is, when the need arises, can you rise up to it? You know, you might have the best diplomats, but if you have the wrong policy, it doesn't make any difference that you are the best. So before I go after diplomats, I go after our mentality. Diplomats receive instructions, okay? When President Bedrosian would send me to Ankara, we agreed on what we wanted, how we wanted, what was the purpose of the trip, and you know, there were serious discussions before going there, or to Iran, or talking to the Azerbaijani, the advisor to the president of Azerbaijan. There was a mentality that allowed us to do certain things, and that is extremely important. Now, you could be a bad diplomat and mess up a good policy, but also you could be the best diplomat, and yet what you're asked to do is not something that is doable. And that I have written. I have said about our diplomats. You know, if they're asked to go and convince the US to recognize Karabaugh's independence, you will get nothing, because they cannot give it to you. The French have told us, we cannot give you independence. Ask for something we can give. all right? And I used to have this debate, I'm sorry, when I was negotiating with the Azerbaijanis and Turks from Karabakh leaders. Say, you are a good diplomat, you're the best diplomat. Why don't you go and ask for independence? I said, well, if I ask for independence, I wouldn't be a good diplomat because I don't think they can give it. You know, this is confusing lobbying with state policy. These are very different things. You know, we're lobbying in Washington to get independence for Karabakh. If we get it, will those who support finance my lobbying lose anything? Not really. They will not lose their home. They will not be attacked by the enemy, right? It is lobbying. I'm doing it if I get it right. But if you're responsible for a state, for the future of a people, for the safety of a people, you cannot go after things that are impossible and therefore get nothing. Good diplomacy. Yeah, go ahead.
I was also going to, we're running out of time, unfortunately. What words of advice would you have for young Armenians who might contemplate a career in diplomacy?
Well, you know, let me tell you, comment first on your, Shahé, on your Lebanese Armenian culture that encouraged the doctor, engineer, architect, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I had a relative who realized that I'm finishing high school and want to go to a university. And he said, you will be the first in the family, I'll finance you. And then a week later asked me, what were you going to study anyway? And I said, I'm not sure, history or, you know, political science, whatever. He said, not a penny, right? So I still went and studied what I wanted. So it's a very real value system that is behind what is happening. My advice would be very simple, never to lose your common sense, never think ideologically, read a lot of history, read a lot of interpretations of power relations, and most of all, the following. I'm answering this because I had a request from France to organize a course on diplomacy for Armenians who are interested in diplomacy. And the first thing is, you have to know how to stop your own logic, suspend it, suspend your knowledge of your history and narrative, and listen to the other guy. What is he saying, or she? Understand what the logic of the other guy is. If you do not understand, you're going into a room without, you know, blindly. You have to know what is the meaning of the particular kind of yes that came or the no that came. You have to understand the other's culture. You have to understand the other's history, the way they interpret it, and respect it. You don't have to agree with it. You say, look, my friend, I understand this is what you're thinking, and that's why you have this policy. Now, may I present my understanding and tell you maybe that there are some assumptions that are wrong in your thinking. I have done that with Ilham Aliyev and Haydar Aliyev and my other Turkish colleagues. I say, look, I know what you think. I know the way you understand your history, and I understand the logic of it, okay? But I say, what if I tell you that the way that history is makes it impossible for you to understand why something is important to me? Okay. Now, if the situation is that I am holding a gun at your head, I don't need to know your culture, right? I don't need to know about what religion means in your culture. I have a gun at your head. If you don't do what I tell you, I'll, you know, fire. But diplomacy is the art of avoiding getting to the point where someone has a gun at your head. How was it that we were able for all these years? We went to war against Azerbaijan. We took Karabakh. We took 7 districts around it, and Turkey did nothing, except to say, I'm not opening the border. How was it that that happened? It happened just like that because it wasn't Erdogan. The others were not patriotic Turks who considered Azerbaijanis their cousins.
There is so much more I would have liked to have asked you, but alas, we've run out of time. Let us therefore move on to the Q&A section, perhaps. But first, the Armenian nation is in a deep hole now. We have been in deeper holes before, though, and we have emerged with our fist in the air, and I know that we're going to overcome again. When you imagine a bright future for our country, for our nation, what do you see and what gives you hope? What gives you cause for optimism?
Let me say that I am very cautious about your formulation as to we came out and we did better, okay?
Okay.
I don't think we did. You see, this is part of the diasporan mentality that we survived. How did we survive the genocide? After losing our homeland, even if it wasn't called Armenia, this was our homeland, we lost it. We lost half of our people. We should have been 20 million now, and we're only 5 million or 6 million. Mm. This is key to our understanding our history, I think. Every time we lost also part of our ability to defend what was left in the future. We lost Armenian-Hovsepian. We have more difficulty defending Hayastan. We lost Karabakh. We have more difficulty defending what is Hayastan today. We have less people. We have less money. We have less land. We have less resources. So we are on a down slope, not that we're just down, we're on a slope. We are having difficulty now defending the last piece that is left. So this is where we should begin. The hope I have is, number one, that we realize that we cannot isolate what happened today in this war from what has been happening in the last 30 years and before that. Once we realize that this is a slope that makes it more and more difficult to defend what is left of Artsakh and of Armenia, then we must say, what is it that we want to do and become? We have to think. There is no universal value. There's no such thing as, the best Armenian or the best Armenia. We have to say, these are the realities, these are the resources. The best we can do is this. And it is possible to dream. There's nothing wrong with dreaming. Is not fantasy. Dreaming is saying, I want to get there. And then you wake up, right? And you say, this is what I have. Can I get there? What do I need to do? Can we overcome our partisanship? Can we overcome thinking institutionally instead of bedaganutyan as a state? Part of our problem is thinking institutionally. The church says, what do I need to do in order? Let me give you an example, and I will cut it short, and then we can take the question. We want Armenia to be strong. A strong Armenia requires people in it. We have been losing people from Armenia. Armenia has been losing people. The possibility that Syrian Armenians could go, Lebanese Armenians could go, because these are unstable and constantly they're being, we're losing Armenians in Lebanon and Syria. Why not organize and go there? We said no. Okay, we cannot want a strong Armenia, a depleted Armenia, one way of, and be against one of the ways by which we could strengthen that Armenia demographically. We cannot do both. When we are saying no, let's not, we are thinking institutionally, we're not thinking of the state of Armenia. Now, all of these concerns can be legitimate, but in order to have hope, we have to decide. We have to understand how we are thinking. What is the real interest we are defending? Why is it that after so long, 100 years of the post-genocide diaspora, we still don't have a diasporan body that at least is a forum for consultation and may agree on some things for all of Armenians in the diaspora. Why not?
That certainly sounds like political thinking to me. Okay, we do need to get to the questions now. Those of you who cannot stay with us, we thank you for attending, and we hope that you will join us again in our future webinars. Those who have a bit more time, we are fortunate in that Dr. Libaridian has agreed to stay a bit longer to answer your questions, and we're grateful to him for that, very grateful. And so let us move on to the questions. Some of them have come to us via email, and some are going to be in the Q&A section. So Dr. Libaridian, the first question: if there were to be an Armenia-Turkey rapprochement, would the diaspora be a part of that process? And if so, in what way and to what extent? And if we were confronted with a fait accompli similar to that of the protocols, what should our response be?
Well, I think if there's a rapprochement, if there's a reasonable negotiation, and by that I mean the threat to Armenia is less from Turkey because of the rapprochement, I would hope the diaspora would support it. Mm-hmm. The key here is we have to stop thinking that anything that is that we do with Turkey is bad, it's treason. We have to stop thinking anything that is good for Turkey is bad for us. Anything that is bad for Turkey is good for us. We are dealing with the survival of the state. If by negotiating agreements, treaties with Turkey, we lessen the danger, I do not see any value higher than that. Similarly with Azerbaijan, we need to think of the survival of the state that we have and the security. There are ways of dealing with that. You could become a superpower, okay? You could get China, India to support you, to send you troops and their technology to defend you. If you could do it, fine. But you could also lessen the dangers if that is possible. Now, there are those in the diaspora and in Armenia that say it is impossible to do so. I am not one of those. I think it is possible. It is possible to decrease the danger from Azerbaijan and Turkey. And if rapprochement leads to that, then I think if you don't agree, you can stay quiet. But if you go against it, then you are becoming a threat to Armenia's security yourself.
It was evident that Armenians could not succeed in Artsakh without Russian support. Why did Russia not intervene to prevent the loss of the 7 occupied regions and the loss of Artsakh's independence? And weren't the Armenian intelligence services monitoring the situation and planning anything? Weren't they noticing the shifting alliance between Russia and Turkey?
I'm sorry, who is they? I missed that word. Who is it that ignoring, or when do you say they? Are you talking about
the Armenian
authorities?
No, intelligence services in particular.
Armenian?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, we have to be careful in assigning our successes to Russia only or Russian help. I can tell you that during the first war, there were times where Russia stopped supplying us, and it was our ingenuity that still led us to success. So Russia does not have unconditional support, number one. And we have to give credit where credit is due. You know, we have a habit, or some people have the habit of downplaying when you are successful. How can you downplay when you are successful and still expect to be successful in the future. If you don't understand that you can trust yourself and your judgment, number one. Number two, Russia has been telling us that they would not be part of any war that is Garapal war.
Yes.
They've been telling us. So it doesn't require so much information, intelligence. They are telling us over 2 decades, you guys have to do this. They told us before the war. They told us during the war. So ignoring is not ignoring something that was a secret. It was there. And as the questioner says, Turkey, Russia were talking to each other. Putin and Erdogan had a number of phone calls. What did they talk? Well, you could guess, you could inquire. The evidence was there. But there's this blind belief we have. Armenian intelligence services should have known, of course. Now, maybe they knew and they told the prime minister. I don't know. I know that the chairman of the chiefs of staff later declared that in June of last year, before the war, when he became the chairman, he met with the prime minister and told the prime minister, if there's an attack, we can resist 3 to 4 days. He published this, so it's not a secret. Now, what happened after that? Why then did we think we could win a war? Because certainly war would not have ended in 3-4 days.
There's another question. Can the Minsk group do anything with what is left of the negotiation process?
Well, it can do certain things, but not much in my view. I think relying on the Minsk group now, when it has been ineffective for 25 years, is what are we basing it on? And rely to do what? To change what is on the ground? That depends, as I said, on Russia and Azerbaijan, not on France, not on the US. The Minsk group did not condemn the attack, did it?
No.
The Minsk group did not say, Azerbaijan, you didn't have the right to attack. It did not. So why do we expect it to do anything different now? Now, if there are any negotiations on the question that I formulated, should there be an Armenian, territorially defined Armenian Artsakh or not, maybe it has something to say. But at the end, it is Russia and Azerbaijan, to some extent Turkey, a little bit Armenia, that will have anything to say about that, about what remains. It's like, finding straws to hang on to. I personally do not think. They can do a lot of help with the humanitarian assistance. They can do a lot of help maybe to talk to Turkey and Azerbaijan to be less threatening maybe. All of that can happen. But in the fundamental question, and I always think about the fundamental, not the symbolic, not the consolation prizes. The France and the United States, I'm sorry to say, because they were left out of the deal, right? It was at the end Russia and Azerbaijan that signed, did the November 9 declaration. They feel offended, they feel kicked out, and now they're saying they want to be back in the business of Garapal. Well, what business is left? I'm not sure that there's a very big role. I'm not saying there is no role. I'm not saying it doesn't help. But we should not think in abstract terms saying, oh, we will now be able to use France and the US to balance Russian influence, okay? That's not how it works.
What was the political thinking, in your view, behind the Armenia not recognizing Artsakh?
Well, since the status issue is one of the two major issues, that was to be negotiated. then recognizing the independence was predetermining, okay? Saying that this is our position. Artsakh is independent. That means we don't recognize the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. We recognize independence, the secession of Karabakh. That means, and since Azerbaijan says no, I don't recognize it, then there's nothing left to negotiate. That means Armenia is saying that, look, we care about Karabakh, we went and took it, and then we took 7 districts to secure it, and that's it. We've done, as some people did. There were a number of Tashnak Tsagan leaders who said, there is no problem of Karabakh left. We have resolved it. If Azerbaijan has a problem, let them go and scream about it, okay? We have resolved it. We should recognize the independence of Karabakh. That's how we treat it, and that's all there is to it. And by saying it, it didn't end. Azerbaijan was not convinced. Azerbaijan was getting ready for war all this time. It was saying they would go to war all this time if there's no solution. And what happened? When did Azerbaijan go to war? When the Prime Minister of Armenia went to Karabakh and declared Karabakh is Armenia. Karabakh, Artsakh, Hayastane, Verch. Okay? What is the signal of that to the other side? It's almost like not only recognizing Karabakh's secession from Azerbaijan, but unification with Armenia. Now, he may have said it symbolically or whatever, but my friends, you're a prime minister, you're not a party leader, you're not a journalist. When you say something, you have to take responsibility for that. Recognizing Karabakh's independence would have been the same as a declaration of war, just as I wrote in September, on September 1, that when the president of Armenia declares that the Treaty of Sèvres is the solution to the Armenian question, that's a declaration of diplomatic war on Russia, on Turkey, I'm sorry. If we don't understand these distinctions and these nuances, and they're not even nuances, then why do you want me to have hope?
Yeah. Do you think that Azeris crossing the border into Armenia is an act of aggression or an act of creating negotiation power for retaking possibly Stepanakert?
I don't think it has much to do with Stepanakert. I don't think they're worried about Stepanakert. I think they can wait. They have Shushi, which is the most important for them.
Yeah.
And they have the south of Karabakh, which is the road to Shushi. And they create a road through Armenian Karabakh to Shushi. They have no problem with that. They can wait. But I think it's more like keeping Armenia on edge, reminding Armenia that they have the military power. And I think it's more like putting pressure so that Armenia deals more seriously from their point of view with the promise with the clause 9, I think, of the November 9 declaration with regard to the corridor from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan. I think that is what they want to. I do not think personally they want to occupy Armenia, they want to whatever, but it's like needling Armenia, saying, look, we can do certain things and you guys have to respect. Now, the fact is that we signed that agreement, that declaration, and not respecting it may mean, may be a cause for war. So it's, as I said, this is something that is difficult to be sure about, but you have to take possibilities. The point is that if you interpret what is happening one way, that is, they want to take, right, Mehri, or they want to take Sunik, then if that's not the purpose, and I'm not sure that's the purpose, then you lose the opportunity to negotiate and to discuss and to understand and to prevent.
Russia is not as strong as we think. You should have heard the Azeri foreign minister to treat Armenians as Nazis while he was speaking to Lavrov, who is Armenian. Their argument was the statue of Shahé. So I suppose the question is, are we overestimating Russia's strength vis-a-vis Turkey, I presume?
Well, vis-a-vis Turkey, well, if there's a war between Russia and Turkey, there's a war against NATO.
Right.
Okay, so it's no longer a war with Turkey.
Right.
So I don't think we should go that way. It doesn't lead us anywhere. Russia, of course, is not up to, but you know, they seem to have new weapons which against which we may not be able to defend. A cyber war, you know, it's we really don't know yet. So it's not going to be the same kind of war. That's number one. Number two, Russia is more willing. There are some countries willing to sacrifice their soldiers. Others are not that easy. Western democracies don't like to have their soldiers killed. So there's also that. On what issue would the West go to war against Russia? Okay, that's a question we have to think about. So that Russia is weak compared to NATO, yes. But Russia is weak compared to Armenia, to Georgia, to even Azerbaijan. You know, that's a questionable thing. The other point with regard to Nishte and all is that, you know, it's not Russia's business. They're not interested in Nishte, non-Nishte, you know, fascist, not fascist. You know, they care about the things they care about. And it is possible to think that for Russia, the Armenian fears, the Armenian interpretation of Azerbaijani Turkish actions and words are not so bad as far as Russia is concerned, since it pushes Armenia more in the lap of Russia, right?
Right.
So, you know, we have to think of all the possibilities. We should not really, be so sensitive. You know.
We are way out of time. There is so much more to ask. I can see there are so many questions, but all good things must come to an end. So thank you very much, Dr. Libaridian, for your insightful analyses and astute observations. Special thanks also to the hardworking executive committee members of the Armenagan-Hovsepian New York, New Jersey chapter, our chair Norair Meguerditchian, Dr. Valin Akhtarpinian, Harutun Diratsian, Seta Kantarjan, Shorik Tarpinian, Shemavon Atamian, Rosin Hovsepian, Araboyajan, and Rafi Nakashian. And thank you, Sireli audience members, for your attention, attendance, and questions. So that's what you, Norair.
Thank you, Professors Libaridian and Sanens, for a highly informative webinar, and thank you to our committee members and all our participants. And I would really stress my apologies to our participants, because I can see over 30 questions on the Q&A board that we never got to it. Our sincerest apologies. Hopefully we should continue this on another date rather than really abuse your times. Now, this has been a first webinar on this topic for the Armenagan-Hovsepian New York, New Jersey chapter, and we expect that it will not be our last. Be well, be safe, and we hope that you will join us again next time. Hişer Pari, Yerevanen, Middle Eastern, Dipananen, Suriayen, Hortananen, Jerusalem, Meatsognerun, Pari, Yerego, Fransayen, Evropayen, Meatsognerun, American, Arevelian, Arevelian Aperu, Pari, Ortsezi, Polorit, Usalor, Bord, Gdestiming, Noren, Yev, Unetsek, Pari, Yev, Khavak, Shapatabechve. Շնորհակալություն եւ ցտեսություն